Okay, so my topic for today is, this is an academic setting, but I like the academic, but I like the real. It is regenerative placemaking. This is a new title of regenerative placemaking. You can cue it. Regenerative placemaking. Solutionary's Guide to an Ecological City. Ecological city. So, much like most creatives in the room, I am an artist, an architect, an urban designer, planner. It's really hard to say, this is what I am. This is my title. So instead, I say my focus in my work is that I am a husband, father, educator, mentor, and lifelong learner. That's the work. So, that's me, right? Raised by my mother, who was a teacher in art, dance, and drama in the classroom, didn't know my father, and that's me with my grandmother in the garden. Nurtured by creativity where I found the worms and the goats and played music outside, had a good time exploring, and my mom reinforced this through travel. She took me to West Africa and Senegal when I was 3 years old, and living life through curiosity, and then I found New York City, right? Found the crazy grit, found the creativity. Big city was where I found more music, more creativity, but then people said, you can't just be an artist, you need to do something, so go be an architect. I said, okay, all right, whatever, we'll figure that out. So in the process of doing the architecture, I started looking at the city through a very specific lens and through photography. So I climbed and traveled anywhere and anywhere I could get access to, on tops of rooftops and buildings, on top of the Manhattan Bridge. I scaled it for a show for the Discovery Channel. It was legal. I would do it anyway, though. And then it was a very different view from that, which is the beauty of the city and the city form, the changing city form, to the reality of the communities that I lived in. So Harlem, Bronx, Chicago, New Orleans, and that moment, frozen in time, and it just like didn't make any sense. So particularly going to school for architecture, studying all the great possibilities of architecture and seeing all these frozen moments made no logical sense. So by the time especially when I have food options, like what food options do you have in certain communities? It's a big issue. So I started looking at the erasure of these spaces, and by the time I was in my grad school for architecture and urban design, started looking at typologies, and a doctorate, I started looking at typologies specifically of urban public housing, and the erasure, the constant erasure of public housing through blight. Now this struck a nerve with me personally, because blight, my understanding of blight is that it is a disease of a plant, and then it got transcribed to people and applied economically to people and communities, something that frustrates plans or hopes in just like an urban decay, urban blight. Becomes a prescriptive pathology for an ecology of absence and chronic urban problems over and over for physical deterioration, poverty, unemployment, health issues, and most importantly, environmental concerns. So I started shifting away from all the depression and looking at the creativity of the communities within which I lived, and the innovation and the stories of resilience. So in the, amazing stories and identity response, right? How do we respond within these communities? So that brings us to the issue of culture. Most people think of culture really kind of as a snapshot way, it's just a way of being, but really if you look at it, it is culture, cultivation, tilling of knowledge that's passed on to succeeding generations. So how does that work with gentrification? If we've gotten stuck into this concept that you bring in the middle class, bring in the affluent, bring in the artists, and then all of a sudden you have new development, but in the process, the externalities, you displace people. So what? You don't fix the problem, though. So you have the juxtaposition between urban growth and urban decline, and that's been our paradigm or way of being. Jane Jacobs challenged in the last chapter that cities are organized complexity as parts of an organic whole. I can't stress that enough. If you get a chance, go back and read that last chapter. And the tattoo I have on my arm is from Frederick Douglass, where justice is denied, where poverty is enforced, where ignorance prevails, neither persons nor property will be safe. And we'll talk about the safety issue in the panel. It's time for a paradigm shift. And the paradigm shift is looking at ecology, an interrelationship of us organisms, humans, and nature within our environment, through triple bottom lines: social capital, natural capital, human capital, and that creativity. So this is where my work begins. The theory stops here, and we start looking at the real. Like urban ag, aquaponics, art, and education as regenerative placemaking. Seed, soil, water, light, something as very basic as that. We are an ecologically ignorant world, period. So it is extremely complex and beautiful and poetic if you know the science and biology. Aquaponics, you feed the fish, they eat, they fertilize the water, goes to feed the plants filter the water to go back to the fish as a balanced ecosystem. It is a testing ground for science and rigor and imagination, and a testing ground for your intuition and methodologies. So what we did, examples, in Milwaukee, Sweetwater, our team took an industrial icon that was foreclosed and forgotten about that used to be that, right? Amazing. But then it became, work disappeared, shifted overseas, empty. We took people from the community who knew how to use the tools, who were underemployed, underappreciated, and started excavating, bringing some new life through carpentry, plumbing, electrician, roofing, wayward academics, people who wanted something to do, veterans, right? You know what I'm talking about. So veterans, and we inserted life in that building in a year. It was forgotten about for 20 years. Within 2 years, we had people from all over the world showing up. You have 20,000 fish and 200 pounds of greens going to 10 restaurants within a 2-mile radius locally. That was the best part, though, when the youth started showing up. We had the nonprofits, and we started Sweetwater Foundation to see, what are you seeing? Can you see your future? What are the words you're seeing? How does math apply in the real? How does science apply in biology in the real? So we started looking at the role of art. Of course, art recreates the space. You can't reimagine if you don't have the image to reimagine. So we said, boom, your youth and your future is being guided by an intergenerational approach. And we started looking at space, commercial applications, looking at food production in the middle of February in greenhouses. Chicago State University, south side of Chicago, we took a shoe warehouse. Same thing. Did it again. 3-pound fish within an 8-month cycle. We started doing raised beds outside, learning how to feed people. That becomes the indoor and outdoor playground. Free field trips, spaces of connection. And that's the artist residency. We started taking vacant spaces, putting thoughts up on the wall for open source discourse through art. Placemaking, regenerative placemaking, spaces for conversation, cultural responses. And then you look up and you have all these projects happening across multiple cities, across continents, and people having conversations through open source conversations around food and the value of the internet, helping us share ideas in order to create a new future. I'm going to flip through these last 2 images. So reimagine what's possible. There grows a neighborhood.